Okay, if you could open up, please, to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And just want to also remind everyone there's a teacher appreciation potluck after services today. You don't have to be a teacher. You can be a student, which is every one of us, to attend that. And pulled up this morning, and I saw Ron's truck on the side of the building. So that always means that something really good is being cooked up from a food standpoint. So whenever you see Ron's truck on the side of the building, that's a good thing from a food standpoint. So, okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and we're going to be talking this morning, or the subject here are things, meat offered to idols. What in the world can that mean for us today in 21st century America? What lessons can we learn from that? How does that apply? And so we're going to see that there's actually some very important lessons here for us to take from this content. So it's only 13 verses. So Ron, if I could ask you to read for us. We're going to just read the whole chapter, and then we'll go back and look at some things. So.
Now, concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet. He ought to know. But if anyone loves God, the one is known by him. Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father of whom are all things, and wait for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge, for some with consciousness of the idol until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. But food does not commend us to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish, for whom Christ died? But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble.
Okay, thank you. So in first century Corinth, this whole issue of meat offered to idols was a big thing, and it was really a daily issue that they had to deal with, because as we talked about and have mentioned several times, of course, idol worship was a major part of the life of first century Corinth, first century Greece, the first century world in general, so Greek and Roman and everything. So, and Corinth had a number of these very large temples to the major Greek gods there. And so much of the social life in the day-to-day life of first century Corinth centered around these idol temples and the activity that took place there, and including the food that was eaten. And so what happened was the meat that was available for public consumption often started out as a sacrifice to the idols in the temple. And then anything that was left over found its way to the meat markets, and then the average folks, if they were not involved with idol worship and the eating of meat in that setting, that meat would end up in the market. And so one way or another, the meat that everyone had access to typically had some interaction with this idol worship and the temple. So also, these temples would have sort of community meals, basically, that everybody or that anybody could attend. And so for someone who was poor, this was, and the food was free. So for someone who was poor, this was the opportunity to have a really good meal or have meat and things like that. So this issue of meat offered to idols was a central issue in first century Corinth and in the first century world. So the Corinthians, this is the next of the questions that they're asking Paul about in their letter. So he's responding to them. So we're seeing there's a number of questions that they've asked, and they're asking him. He's responding. Marriage was a question that we talked about last several weeks. Now the focus now turns to what do we do with this meat offered to idols? Paul gives this his response there, but we're going to see in a second how this impacts us in 21st century America, like I said, because obviously we don't have meat that's offered to idols that we have to deal with. But there's some important principles here that do affect us and that have impact on our daily life. So, but in the immediate context here, so he's talking about meat offered to idols. So beginning of verse 1 there, now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. So right off the bat, he talks about we all have knowledge, and then if you skip over to verse 4, therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. So he's establishing there that, and Christians were taught, and we certainly know, obviously, that all these idols mean nothing. They're man-made, gods, small g. They mean absolutely nothing. And so that's the overarching thing. But the first century church was coming, many of the members were coming out of this idolatry. They had very strong views. They had been taught that these gods were, had meaning and things like that. And then you mix in there were Jewish Christians that had also been taught that you can't eat under the old law, and because it was true, you can't eat certain meats and you can't eat certain foods, things that were unclean and clean and things like that. So not only are the Gentiles having to unwind all their previous teaching about idols and things offered to idols, but the Jews are having to do this. The Jewish Christians are having to do the same thing. So this thing about foods and what is allowable and what's not is a central concern. So Paul, of course, is saying that there's nothing in all of these idols. They are meaningless. And so, but then look down at verse 7. It says, however, there is not in everyone that knowledge. For some, with consciousness of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. And then he says, but food does not commend us to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. So he's acknowledging here that in verse 7, there are some that still, there are some of Corinthian Christians that still have this consciousness, as he says, of the idol. And so they're concerned about, okay, if I eat this, is it proper for me to eat this meat because it's been offered to an idol? And so they had concerns about that, basically. Another word that we often hear for this, or that's used elsewhere, is scruples. Have you heard that term? Scruples? It just, scruples means opinions, or you have an opinion about that, or you have a concern about that. So that's kind of a word that we don't use a lot, but you might hear that is used in this case. So, and then Paul talks about here in verse 9, but beware lest somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. And so, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge, who understand that this idol is nothing, verse 10, eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? So in other words, if, in this case, if this person has concerns about the meat offered to idols, and he sees you who know that this idol is nothing, but you're acting like this is, like you're in the idol's temple and you're eating this meat, and this weaker brother who does not have this knowledge thinks that it's that you're acknowledging that this meat is indeed offered to this idol. So and so he says, latter part of verse 10, will the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So, okay. The immediate context there is this meat offered to idols, which of course the idol is nothing. Therefore, the meat that's offered to idols is nothing, is neither good nor bad. So let's jump ahead to our time here, and what does this mean for us? So the chapter, in a broader sense, deals with what we're going to say matters of indifference. Okay, and so matters of indifference, and so, and then also look at verse 9. It said there's an important word there. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours be a stumbling block to those who are weak. So we're going to talk about this matters of indifference, because this is important for today. And then also we're going to talk about Christian liberty, and what does that mean, and how does that impact our daily life and our faith and things like that. So and then we're going to talk about some implications of that. So, but this matters of indifference. So that's what this is. The meat here is an indifferent thing. So let's develop a definition here to help us understand this. So something that is indifferent is, well, let's ask this. What we're going to develop a one-sentence definition here of something that is indifferent. What would we say about something that is indifferent? How would we define something that is indifferent? And again, it has spiritual application. But if something is indifferent, Correct. So it is something, we say it that way, something neither, I'll say it this way, neither good nor bad within itself. Okay? So something is neither good nor bad within itself. So meat, in this case, is neither good nor bad in itself. I mean, it's just meat. So it's indifferent. It's not either way. Yeah.
It is optional, not obligatory, and it's approved, but not necessary.
Yes. Well, and we're gonna get there. Yes, we're going there because this also we're gonna see what part of our Christian life these principles apply to, and it speaks to what Greg's going there. But so. And you'll see how we'll build this. So, but to kind of step one here, it's something either good or bad in itself. It's optional, but it's neither good or bad in itself. But if we kind of take this one step further, we gotta also understand that even though it's neither good nor bad in itself, so meat here, and we'll give some other examples to kind of make this more relevant also. But something that is indifferent can be, let's see, say it this way. It can be, let's see, neither, I'm going to say that neither, I'm going to say, I'll just do it this way, can be neither good nor bad, right here, in certain situations, getting a little wordy here, but certain situations, but can be, I'll say bad or sinful, in other words, can be, we're going to stick with sinful in other situations. So just to confuse us even more, situations. Okay, so something that is indifferent is neither independent of everything else is neither good or bad. But depending on how it's used, what the situation is, it can be okay in some situations, but it can be bad or sinful in other situations. So, for example, in the example of meat, for example. So, meat in and of itself, nothing wrong, no problem. It's indifferent. It's neither good nor bad of itself. If you just eat meat, but if you're eating, if the meat is being taught or is offered to an idol and is believed to be associated with an idol, then that's not for that person. It's not right to eat that meat. Let's use another example. Another New Testament example, for example, Matthew 15, 1 through 9. There's a reference to the Pharisees would insist and bind on others this specific way of washing cups and washing plates and cups and things like that. So washing plates and cups is neither good nor bad in and of itself, but when it's used to bind on someone or used in a way that is binding, then it becomes the actual washing becomes a problem. See what I mean? So musical instruments. This is another thing we could say. Musical instruments in and of themselves, no, they're indifferent. There's nothing good or bad about them. They are not in themselves wrong or sinful. But if they're used in a worship service like this, then they're not this thing of indifference becomes a bad thing. See what I mean? There's lots of, if we sort of think about this, there's lots of sort of examples that we could use for that. So do you see that important difference? Are you all with me on that? So we have things that are, eating meat is neither good nor bad, and it's something that's needful because we, for nutrition, all that kind of stuff. But it's neither good or bad. But when it's used in offering to an idol, then we would not engage in that. But similar musical instrument in worship, we could think of other examples that would, yes.
Person perceives that object or thing.
That's, yes, and so.
If they see you doing it, how do they perceive that? Do they perceive that as you are a Christian, you shouldn't be doing that, then you probably shouldn't be, even though it's not something that's indifferent like that.
That's, and Sue, that's kind of a perfect segue into this concept here of Christian liberty that is mentioned in verse 9. So we have Christian liberty, as Paul says, importantly, in matters of in what, well, let's do it this way. In our as we've talked about before, in our safe and appropriate interpretation of the Bible, we have there are direct commands, as we've said, or statements. Direct commands, statements. There are what we have commands from review here. We have we have commands. We have examples, approved examples. And there is then also, we have necessary inference, right, that we can draw from that we've looked at, and the necessary inference, and then we have biblical silence that governs these things, of course, as we've talked about. So anything that we don't have a direct command or a statement for, or an approved example, or a necessary inference, everything else is in this realm of opinion, okay? So, and so this is in this realm of opinion is where we have this Christian liberty, which relates to these matters of indifference, and we'll see how that all works together. But we're not free to disobey or go against or practice in a different way again, as opposed to or against these direct commands, examples, or these necessary inferences. We do have this Christian liberty in matters of opinion. So that's what relates to this, the meat offered to idols. In the context, this is a matter of opinion. And Paul is saying, for those that are still weak in their faith, that are still learning, in other words, they're still learning and growing, and if they're still in the stage where they're thinking that that this meat offered to idols is, they have a concern about that, then they shouldn't eat that meat offered to idols. And to Sue's point, a more mature Christian shouldn't lead that brother to think that it's by their actions that it's okay to be eating this meat or offered to idols, and therefore make them stumble in their faith. And we're going to kind of see how that plays out. But we do have this Christian liberty that's mentioned there in verse 9. But it's only critically important here to understand this. It's only in this area of opinion. And so, as opposed to the other, you sometimes might hear in matters of opinion versus these matters, what we often call matters of faith. So matters that are related directly to what we directly have in Scripture. So it's this matters of opinion. Everybody understand that? Are you with me? Is it too? Have I lost anybody? All right. So we'll see how this all. We're going to put this here. So matters of opinion, and this relates to these matters of indifference. These matters of opinion are in themselves are indifferent. So we need a definition here also for Christian liberty, and to kind of help us understand that. And so we could say for this, the ability, let's say it this way, to do or omit something, let's say it that way, and we'll define that in a minute, something that is not related to salvation. Okay, so we have in these matters of opinion, really important here, that are not covered by commands, examples, statements, necessary inference, all that stuff. Matters of opinion, and we'll define those in a minute, or give some examples. So this Christian liberty we have the ability to do or not to do, whatever the thing is, something for things that are not related to salvation, that are not related to matters of faith that we've talked about. So with a couple of very important conditions there, and the first one, look at verse 1, and we're going to tie this together here in a second. So verse 1 of chapter 8, now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. So what's a definition of edifies? What would a definition of edifies be? Build up, exactly. So this Christian liberty must be governed by love, and to build each other up. And look at verse 9 here. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. So our Christian liberty is governed by love and cannot be a stumbling block to those who are weak, or those who are less knowledgeable in their faith. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Correct. 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 Yes, exactly, exactly. So, so that's exactly what's what's happening there. And so, let's talk about some real life examples of this. So what would be some examples of this matters of opinion that we might have? And within that, let's say this. So we have this Christian liberty, but it's we are not to the more mature Christian is not to bind it. Importantly, you cannot bind that on others. And so this, let's see, we'll say it this way: misuse of this, misuse leads to extremes. So misuse of this Christian liberty here leads to extremes. So let's talk about some examples of Christian liberty that we might that we can experience. And I will I'll start off with a couple, and then you'll see where we're going with this. So we've talked about this before, but the order of worship. Okay, that's one that is we could start with. The order of worship. There is no, as we know, there's no. We are commanded to worship. There's no, and with the 5 acts of worship, but how we do them, of course, the order of that, we have Christian liberty with that. We have flexibility with that. There are some who feel very strongly that we should do things in, this 2 songs of prayer, song, Lord's Supper, and if you put the Lord's Supper after the sermon, that's a problem, but clearly that's not, that we have liberty with that. I'm going to do another one here. This is one. Bible versions. So there's, and we'll talk about this a little bit also, but this is a source of great debate also. There are, I will say, there are safe versions that we should use, and there are some non-safe versions. But within these safe versions, we've got liberty, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What else would be an example of that, of this kind of thing? Yeah. There you go. Okay, paperless hymnal. And paperless hymnal. Yep. So that's a yes.
Anything that's authorized but is optional.
Correct. Exactly. So we see this trying to specify to kind of give people examples of that. But yes, everything that's authorized but is optional. And these are another term that we'll hear sometimes are matters of opinion, also matters of, there's another big word, expediency. Expediency. And so Greg is talking about authority and things on Wednesday nights, and expediency is part of that, something that expedites or something that help support. Yeah. Eating in the church building, that's another one. Yeah.
I don't think it's as much now, but whenever I was growing up, it's a big thing.
Those are big
Big
things.
thing.
So, yeah. What else? How about eating in the building? How about there are some that have very strong, they have scruples, they have very strong concerns or opinions about things like Halloween, so Halloween, for example. So I'll just say there's, yes. Huh? Matters of conscience, yes. And some have matters of conscience about Halloween, for example. So it's so best to not invite that person, for example, over to your Halloween party that you're going to have, or if you're going to have a Halloween party. So just as an example. But so you see what this chapter, what Paul is talking about here, and any other examples? Yes, sir. Head coverings. Yep. So that's another that we don't see that as much anymore, but that's something that, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of chapters here. A couple of chapters coming up, head coverings. So, and there you'll still see some women in that have head coverings for their worship, and again, that's if they have concerns about that. Nothing wrong with that. They can have head coverings, and it doesn't. They can have head coverings. Yes. Right. Exactly. Those are other examples of that. So we are exactly. So you see where that is. Yes. Right. 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 Right.
Put that stumbling block or cause someone who is not as mature to suffer spiritually.
Correct. And we are exactly. That's the key thing here is to deal with each other in love and patience and things like that.
Eric,
and so yes.
It could all be summed up in having a Christian attitude in all things.
Yep, I agree. And along those lines, so this misuse of this leads to extremes, though, and it's on the one end, what does that lead to? It leads to constant bickering and argument and strife and all that stuff, and on the other end, it's the other extreme of that other end, and we'll wrap up with this, is, well, we can't judge, and so everything is okay, So we got to have balance in our Christian life, and so those extremes on either side are wrong. That's what it leads to. But so hopefully this has made sense. It's really important to understand what these matters of opinion are, and that we have liberty in those areas. So. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your attention.